My name is Lauren. I'm an MLIS grad student and the Student Advocacy President at San Jose State University. I, like many other students, have been watching the world respond to the issue that severely impacts the industry that many students like myself are hoping to enter. Admittedly, it looks pretty bleak. That's why I decided to put out a call to get the perspective of real-life experienced librarians today, to hear their side of the story. Even though
an angry guy called me, but it was really funny.
Full voice. I'm like, I thought it was the same thing.
Not a single person.
Yeah, exactly. This is good. This is a good time to graduate now. Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thanks for letting me know.
What I say is, have them read the book.
So the first question is simply just like, what has been your experience with book challenges and book bans?
Sure. I'm relatively new as library director. And when I came in just over a year ago, I initially, like the week before I started, the city manager had called me and said, "Hey, just a heads up." I started at the end of June. So he called and said, "Hey, heads up, there's a patron that has a concern about the Pride display in the library." He said, we're gonna give you a little space, but at some point in the near future, you're gonna need to meet with this person and talk to her. He forwarded an angry letter she wrote to the mayor. So that was fine. So he gave me a couple months to settle in and then asked me to reach out to her, and I set up a meeting. She shared her concern specifically about the material on the display. It talked about gender fluidity for children. She was not happy with that. And so I walked her through the collection development policy, the request for reconsideration that we have, and told her, I think at the end of the day, we're here to add voices to the library, not ban them. So, and I said, if there's books you want us to have, if there's topics you're interested in, please send those to me. I'm way more interested in adding your point of view to the library than I am silencing other people's points of view. She ended up being pretty okay with that. She did put in one request for reconsideration. So I developed a procedure around that hadn't been in place before, where I had several of the MLS librarians review the material. They write a little statement, like a summary of whether or not they think it should be included and why. And then I did like a synopsis and gave her our final consideration that, yes, we're going to keep it in the collection. Here's the reasons why. So she got to see kind of a thoughtful process. And then, she sent me list of books she was interested in. They were not all available for us to purchase, but I was able to get a couple of them and add them to the thing. So that was kind of the initial piece. So that was would have been like June, July, August 22. Then this past spring in April, seemingly out of the blue, I got an email from Representative Mass Resistance asking about when the next library board meeting is. So I reached out to city management. I was like, right. I looked them up and it's like, okay, well, here's the whole thing. So we ended up having to cancel that board meeting anyway because there was no agenda items. We have a advisory board, not a board of trustees. There's not really a lot of business they can conduct. Then we got some contact from a local figure who is concerned about everything in the city, not just libraries and not just books that he disagrees with, saying he was going to come and talk about this. So we are kind of given a heads up that he was going to come to the next governing body meeting. So that's the city council. So that kind of came about. We kind of reached out to the library board, people we knew as allies, and they kind of started spreading the word around as well in the community. And then I reached out on behalf of the library to ALA. They put me in touch with the Freedom to Read Foundation and connected me with the everylibrary.org group. Met with Freedom to Read. They were fantastic. In fact, they met with city management, the city attorney, and myself, and kind of went over kind of the nuts and bolts of what the law says, what the rules are, how to handle these things, also what to expect from these groups like Mass Resistance, kind of like what their playbook is and whatnot. So that was really helpful. And then in the meantime, the library board got in contact with everylibrary.org. So they started walking them through the process to kind of organize the community a little bit, which was good. So by the time we got to the first governing body meeting, we knew there'd be kind of a big to do, but we didn't know what we would get. Backing up a little bit, considered a fairly conservative community. Our governing body, 7 members, including the mayor, 6 of them are Republicans. They rely on mostly a religious conservative base. So I think from the outside looking in, it looked like they would have a lot of traction here. But city management, city staff, and city attorney were very much opposed to any kind of book challenge and very much inside of the library, which I realize is not a situation that all libraries are in. So I'm extremely fortunate to have the allies that I do in city government with this. We put things together as best we could. We put together some talking points. There's another local group called the Coalition for Conservatives in Action. I think they're just a New Mexico group at this point. They started at the south side of the state. This local figure was their local representative in Rio Rancho, along with a couple other people. So they had been posting on their Facebook, which we were monitoring, that they were going to putting out the call for people to come and fight against pornography in the library and indoctrination of children. And there weren't unique talking points that haven't been seen or heard by our colleagues everywhere else in the country. So showed up, got out of the car, walked up to City Hall for the governing body meeting. And there's a bunch of people up front with a big banner that said support our libraries. So that was really awesome to see. And I was going to go up and just say, hey, I'm the library director. Thank you guys for being here. And I kind of I couldn't get it out. I got all choked up. And so I was able to talk to them. But so we went in and city council chambers were full. They've never, there's always a couple people that show up as concerned citizens, but the place was packed. And even from a first read of the room, it looked largely like they're supporting the library. So they got to public comments, and I pulled my documentation, but something like 7 or 8 people stood up in the course of this to talk about how the library is full of pornography and terrible, and we need to pull these books off the shelf. The one guy in particular is very inflammatory with his comments. They held up a couple books. We had I think we had close to 30 people at the first one speak in defense of the library, which was amazing. We had high schoolers speak. We had a 92-year-old pastor speak who remembers seeing Hitler on newsreels. We had people of a variety of races, genders, identifications. We had people that stood up and declared themselves as conservatives, and they really wanted to protect the library and protect the free speech, as well as a large group of liberals. County Democrats really mobilized quite a bit. We had a couple of our elected officials, state level elected officials, show up. So that was really great. The conservative group kept pushing on the city council members specifically. They accused us of violating a few state statutes, so we looked them up with the attorney, and they were, of course, completely wrong, and they gave all the reasons. There was another city council meeting where basically the same thing happened. Just a couple of people spoke out against the library. Tons of people spoke out on behalf of the library. At that point, we had a presentation for the governing body where we said, okay, this is actually what the law says. This is the rules. This is what we're doing. Here's the collection development policy and how it works. Here's the process. And then by the time the third governing body came around, and these people were still voicing their concerns to city government, city manager, we prepared a resolution for the governing body to approve, supporting the library. And the resolution basically just said, we affirm the library is doing their job. They're following the collection development policy. They have the appropriate level of protections in place for families to make their own decisions about what their kids read and have access to. And so at that point, I reached out to the New Mexico Library Association, kind of put out a call throughout the state and asked that my colleagues write into the governing body and they encourage them, yes, this is the right thing to do. We asked for a lot of people to show up. So a lot of people showed up. They had 80 some odd emails come in, only one email opposing the resolution, just from the same guy. His colleagues had kind of dropped off. Right. So there was initially half a dozen or so. And I think when they saw they didn't have a lot of traction, they kind of moved on. Massive Resistance, this national group, I think they were kind of excited to support this guy initially. And then when they saw that there was no support, they kind of seemed to have pulled out their support from him. So there wasn't a lot going on there at that point. And then we were able to get the governing body, again, largely conservative, to unanimously support this resolution. The city, they've been told that the council chambers have never been so packed or busy, or there's never been anything this contentious before. It was interesting. I was very fortunate to have the support that I did and be able to mobilize the groups that I did. That's the big story. This individual showed up at a library advisory board meeting, a couple other city government meetings, to reiterate his stance that the library is full of pornography and we shouldn't be talking about gender fluidity to kids or talking about same-sex relationships and all the things. But it seems like it's dwindled down to just him. So that's my experience here.
I think it's really important because, I've been talking to a variety of people, and a lot of
like a lot of the questions that we have are like, how can people support you, or how, if something were to happen, what should people do? Like,
Mhm.
so I'm like, okay, that's really cool that your first meeting that a bunch of people came. Like, how did they know to come? Was it because of every library, or like how did people know to show up?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I felt like my hands were somewhat tied, right? As the city employee library director, like I could only do so much. Advocacy is not necessarily in my portfolio in this job description. Having the library advisory board was. So I kind of went to them right away. And after I had talked to ALA and the Freedom to Read Foundation, Joyce at Freedom to Read is amazing. She should be sainted. So she kind of gave some suggestions. So I went to the library advisory board and said, reach out to your friends, your neighbors. If you can get a hold of the Democratic Party, that's it shouldn't be a partisan thing, but obviously it is, right? So, let's lean on the side that's going to support us. So I think getting the word out to them, and they were really able to mobilize their group of constituents, that was helpful. So I think I can only speak from my own experience, but it seems like tapping into local political groups that are going to be in favor of supporting the library would be a good way to do it. And then it was kind of like I gave a little push and then was able to stand back and let them kind of do their thing. That was a big part of it. I think some of the library staff, I can neither confirm nor verify, but I think some of them, started leaning on their friends and neighbors and people that they knew. So I was also just very clear about it with my staff from day one. Like, hey, everyone, here's what's going on. Here's what we know. Yes, this is scary stuff. We're gonna go through it step by step, and we're gonna do it together. So making sure that they were aware and that they live here, their families live here, right? So not keeping staff in the dark, but giving them as much information as often as I could, I think was helpful, because I know that they were talking. I think that's what people can do.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, because I've talked to several school librarians. The other groups that I've heard that have gone after this sort of thing has been like Moms for Liberty, for example.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd be curious if it didn't work with the public library, would they be going after school districts, or, like, although if they didn't get any traction, who knows? Obviously, a tactic in general seems to be they're going after the kids sort of thing.
Yeah, that's the angle, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, they're going after the kids. We're teaching kids these things. We're indoctrinating them, right? Parents have no say in what their kids can check out, and they'll learn all sorts of scary things. Yeah, and I think the graphic novels, the visual pornography for kids is one of the angles. So yeah, I think the schools is another avenue that they could go after. I don't know how doable it is in every community, but we know that this isn't really a partisan issue. Like, people on both sides of the aisle are opposed to banning books. Trying to get a hold of the faith communities locally that are in support of the library. 3 or 4 people, I think, that stood up and identified as pastors that spoke on behalf of the library. And I think the governing body needed to hear that too, that it wasn't the religious right that was, opposing this. It was, people of faith were on both sides of this issue, and people of faith wanted them to keep the freedom of speech. I don't know how doable that is everywhere, but I think the churches that want to ban the books are in the minority.
That's good to hear. I mean, part of the other thing with the school libraries, I'm just bringing it up because it's been something I've been talking about recently, is like a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
school librarians, they don't have other librarians they're working with. Like, they are the librarian. And
right.
maybe they have like somebody helping them, like an assistant, but they don't have a library team to talk to. And hopefully their administration is on the same page as them. But that's a question. Bring it up because something I've been talking to them about is like, they're like, as much as the local public libraries can be in tandem with the school libraries and whenever possible, that seems like a strength to them, because they may be like, well, at least in California, there are a lot of school libraries that don't even have fully credentialed librarians that work in school libraries. I think
Yeah, I
that's
think
a
that's pretty
national
common.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
may also be that the people working there just aren't really prepared, or weren't prepared until recently, to be like, "Oh, this has never been an issue, and now it's an issue."
Yeah, I think, I don't know, because I mean, it's hard to get into the schools here, and we have school librarians and whatnot. And I know it can be a challenge for public libraries across the country, but I don't know how to do this. But like school librarians, like I want them to know that they should reach out to their local public library. They should reach out to their state library. They should say, hey, I'm here all alone. I don't have an MLS. I just took this job, whatever. I think we have supports in everywhere in every state. But I understand that I think they feel very isolated too for all the reasons you said. They're often the only person. They may not have administrative support. They may not have the education to know that there's even these things out there. Or in state library groups, right? Like there's California State Library Association or something like that.
I mean, I went to the California School Library Association conference,
Okay.
and it was very interesting because I see, like, I'm a student, like I'm finishing in the fall, but I signed up for the wrong conference because I thought it was the same thing, and then I was like, oh,
Okay.
I'll go anyway. I just didn't know that they were separate, and so it was really interesting because all these people were like, thank God I have somebody else to talk to that knows what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And a lot of them maybe the only one in their district even because of funding. So it's like,
Mhm.
so, and some of them didn't even have the money to come to the conference. So we had districts missing. So like, just stuff that I'm more aware of now that I wouldn't have even thought about because I'm not on that track to be a school librarian.
As you say that, I think we could all be better, whether we're in public or academic. We should be better about reaching out to our local school librarians and just letting them know, hey, we're here. You want to get coffee or something? I'm
Yeah.
as guilty as anyone of not. We get caught up in the work we're doing every day. We don't think about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think with schools, the thing you hear about is it's the school board meetings, right? And so it's the angry parent showing up at the school board meeting. So I think whatever mechanism is in place there, again, I think probably something we should all try to take care of in our community is like making sure that positive voices also show up at those school board meetings. And like, hey, I'm so glad that my kid has access to this stuff. This is really important. Again, especially if we get someone that represents a dominant local religious group, whatever it is in that community, but get some people from some churches there saying, hey, I go to this church and I think this is important to have access to this stuff. So it doesn't feel like it's just the one voice. So I think that's what's happening, right? They get in those rooms and it's these minority of very loud voices and no one's speaking on
Yeah.
behalf of libraries because we don't know this is happening until after the fact.
Right. Be as prepared as possible to explain to parents and to whoever, like, this is how books end up in our library, this is how things are chosen, etc. Pornography cannot just somehow end up in the library or whatever the case may be.
Right, exactly.
I think a lot of people have this like, yeah, support banned books or whatever, but there's a lot of people they don't really know beyond that. Like, how do I help? Or
Right. Like, what does that actually look like?
yeah, so that's part of why we're doing this to like explain as much as possible for one thing, what can library students know or people in the library community, but also like could the average person know about how they could be supportive for if this were to happen in their area? Like how can someone know about a city meeting that's coming up that's going to talk about this?
That's a good point. Like this was not an agenda item on the city council meeting, right? We just kind of knew about this because of this chatter in the community, so it was never like an agenda. And I think they're not an agenda item until it's to the point where a decision needs to be made, right? And the one, we were fortunate, but the ones that hit the news are the bad decisions. So I think people just knowing that they can look on their local government website, and even if they don't think anything's happening, just, show up every couple months to a city council meeting and during public comment, just stand up and say something like, hey, I just want to let you guys know how much I appreciate and love our local library. I love that we have freedom of speech in this country, whatever they want to say. But having that kind of, I think, a constant low grade voice is probably really helpful and powerful.
I'm in Huntington Beach, so I don't know if that rings a bell, but it's not
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
great. So
Yeah.
there's a lot happening here right now, and it's hard to know how much of it is fringe opinion and not fringe opinion about some of the choices that are being made.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is fringe opinion, but it's, it's playing on this overall partisan dynamic we have going on in our country right now, right? So like that's why, so being in a conservative community, and I've worked in libraries in other conservative communities, like I feel it's really important for us to not present ourselves as like, oh, the libraries are liberal. And it's like the libraries are American. We're here about freedom of speech, and here's what that means. Here's some conservative voices in our community. Homeschool group. So the lady that had the initial concern when I first started about the Pride display, like, she's never going to agree with me. She's never going to want a Pride display in the library, but she's actually kind of become an ally because she's a homeschool mom and she's part of a homeschool group, and homeschoolers use their public library a lot, right? So making sure that we have things to meet their needs. We're not excluding them because we're not like the crazy liberal public library with only liberal stuff. We're the public library with everyone's stuff, which includes all these things. That's been really helpful. She could have easily been part of this circus and brought her group into them. But because I already had that relationship with her, she was actually very clear early on. She's like, I'm not a part of this group. These people are not speaking for me or for my community, for my church, for whatever. If there's a way we can cultivate conservative allies for our libraries, it's important. Then it's harder for them to be like, well, everyone who believes X needs to hate libraries because they're evil, right? And it's like, well, no, that's not how it is. So my little bit of understanding in the news is that things are grim and hunting and beats, but I'm confident it's a minority group. And the other group is just being fed half truths. Like they don't actually understand. They're just hearing, and it's scary, right? The library is just letting little kids check out books with depictions of sex acts in it. Like, okay, well, that doesn't sound good to anyone, right? Like, so trying to educate those groups and being like, no, here's what it is. And parents should be there with their kids making the choice. We talked a lot about parental rights, right? Because that's a big conservative hot button issue, right? Like they want parental rights. Well, here's the parental right. Like you should watch what your kid's checking out. You should be there with them. You should be part of the thing, right? We don't make decisions on what your kid checks out. You as the parent do. And so that was helpful for the governing body for sure. They really wanted to know that they had rights as parents and as city council members to decide what their kid reads. And that's kind of what they needed to hear, I think, to get them all on their side. And one of them is a pastor of a very large church, a very large, very conservative church. And he's on the governing body. He voted yes to affirm the library. And he uses the library all the time, certainly in the initial camp of like, oh no, this is bad. We can't have this stuff for kids. About the Pride thing and the Pride display, I think something too that helped is being very intentional and clear that yes, we do a Pride display, but we also do a 4th of July display. We do a President's Day display. We do a Christmas display. We do, to be able to like roll it out as like, this wasn't an exceptional thing that we were trying to indoctrinate kids. This is, it's a nationally recognized event along with all these other ones. If you want me to not do that, well, then we're not going to do the 4th of July either. So I think being able to kind of show that these are just one piece of a larger thing that was helpful for us too, and helpful again for the governing body to say, well, I don't know why you guys are doing a Pride display. Like, well, yeah, because it's a nationally recognized month. Or should we stop doing Indigenous Peoples Day too? Like we have a huge Native community here. Like, well, no, we can't stop doing that. So, I think those kind of things are helpful to show that we're not partisan, I guess.
Yeah.
Or as unpartisan as we can be.
So it's funny that you mentioned the homeschool thing. I was homeschooled. My dad is very involved in homeschool charter school groups now still. Cool. So like California has a lot of homeschoolers as well. And I very much frequented my local library because of it. And a lot of homeschoolers, like you said, they use libraries. So yeah, there's a lot that can be said for sure.
Yeah. That doesn't help the school librarians as much, but I think it helps public librarians to cultivate those relationships with those groups. Because people homeschool for all kinds of reasons, and a significant portion of that population, right? They use libraries.
Have you noticed in your library's social media presence, has there been a rise in like negative comments or anything like that on regular posts, or is it pretty much fine? Like,
those are good questions. So I can speak to actually, and I want to talk about a couple things you just said, and this is really like all pointers that we got from the Freedom to Read Foundation, like early on, and they were so helpful. So right away, we shut down comments on our social media, which, I realize, and some of my staff don't like it. I don't know that I like it because it limits engagement, but Freedom to Read was like, this is a really important step. You do this because libraries exist in different legal statuses, right? But we're a department of the city. So anything that gets put on there stays on there, right? So I can't remove those comments because they're public comments on a public forum. So shutting that down so we don't even have that option, I think was helpful. So they couldn't do that. They couldn't comment on the library's page about the library posting pornography. They had to keep it on their fringe group pages, their friends pages. So I think that was used. I mean, we'll never know what they didn't type because they didn't type it, but I think it's a useful thing, and we'll probably leave the comments turned off for quite a while. And then the request for reconsideration form, right, that goes along with the collection development. We got some good pointers on that, so we've changed that over time to kind of make it tighter. So it includes things like, did you read the title in its entirety? Please suggest an alternate title on the same topic that you feel is better aligned with the library's mission, right? So put a lot of work on them. And also, we don't have it available on our website anymore. So if you want the form, you got to come in and ask for it in person. We'll happily give it to you, but it's in paper form only, which is, the opposite of what we're doing with everything else. But then they got to talk to the folks at the desk, and then that gives us a chance for the librarian to say, well, what is it you're upset about with this book? Like, why? Maybe they'll still fill it out, but it at least opens up another opportunity for dialogue. Oh, I can see why you're upset. Did you know we have these other books that might actually match what you want? So those are all recommendations that we took from the Freedom to Read Foundation suggestions. And I think that they're helpful. Because you also hear about these horror stories where libraries are getting flooded with all these forms and they just have to do all the work to keep up with even though if they're not going to remove a book, they still have all this paperwork, right? So now we got to spend all this time and energy on this thing instead of what we should be doing. Oh, the rise in activity, that's what you had asked about. In a lot of ways, this actually has worked in our favor, right? So we have had a rise in activity. We have a lot more library supporters being vocal about library support. People coming in saying things like, how can we support the library? Thank you guys for what you're doing. We heard about what's happening in the news. We want to make sure this doesn't. I've had people from other communities in New Mexico and other, reaching out, how can we not have this in our community? What can I do to support my local library? So it's been kind of a positive rise in activity, which is good. And it's, it's going to be different everywhere. In New Mexico's, we had a small population here, and it is largely a liberal state. We just happen to be in a conservative town in that state. But so we've had that, and that's been kind of nice to see. We also did not have any complaints about our Pride display this past month. Wow. Which, like, in April, when they're middle of this, we're like, it's looking scary to do our Pride display in June like we normally would, and really, like, we had to, like, yes, we're going to do it. It's the right thing to do. It's part of this larger thing. It'd be shameful and wrong not to do it, and kind of like doing it, embracing for impact. And I didn't hear anything.
So. I'm so, like you were saying that things that make the news are usually the bad news. So, like, I'm so curious, like, was there no coverage about what was going on with you guys, like, locally?
There was some coverage, and we kind of pushed for it. Yeah. So there's a local paper that leans conservative. So they covered it a little bit, and it was right of neutral. It wasn't a mistelling of what happened, but it definitely had a point of view. So we saw that. So we reached out to the city manager's office to a different local paper that tends to lean more liberal and said, hey, here's a thing that's going on. We also reached out to the larger Albuquerque Journal, which is the large regional paper, and said, just heads up, here's the thing that's going on here for the first time in the state. This is a national news story that's like, come home to our little corner of the world. So we kind of tried to generate some publicity. The local news showed up. They wanted to do a couple things. The library director of Albuquerque, which is the big city, and we're like the suburb, he got on the news and talked about what a shameful thing it is to ban books. And I was sending stuff out to the New Mexico Library Association listserv, and it's a small state, so we're a small community. We kind of know most of the other librarians in the state, so that it was out, hey everyone, here's what's going on here. Keep you posted, just so you know this is happening. Here's the update. Here's what's going on. So we I think intentionally like tried to get some news stories to show what is happening, and so people were aware. I think that helped. That's probably another thing that helped people jump on the support is like you see this stuff. Well, not in my state. I'm not going to let that happen here. And some people showed up and it's like, hey, I just saw that on the news yesterday. I'm not going to let this happen in my town. That can happen in fill in the blank area, but not here. So I guess, backing up again, like we did that because I had such good support from city management and we were working so close together on it. Like why even I got permission to talk to you about this.
Right.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
so, we're a city department, we as city employees, we do not talk to the media. It goes through our PR. Like and certainly, I wouldn't want my staff doing this, partially because I don't want to put them a bullseye on their head or anything.
Yeah.
I want to protect them and take care of them. But I think that's part of it, right? Like we don't have the ability to speak freely about this kind of thing. And if you're in a position where, your city management, your governing body, your administration is not supportive, then yeah, you absolutely can't talk about it. And I think that works against us. Like I think getting the word out, there's more people out there and people love libraries. People want to support their library, but that's not a criticism of the rules. Like they're in place for a reason. I also I don't want my staff running around just talking to any news reporter at any time. We need to be careful about the messages we put out. But I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of our colleagues may not be able to say any of these things, or they might put their jobs in danger. It might be.
Yeah. I understand that it's a choice to talk about this. It just feels like wow, how did we get to the point where I almost like, in a documentary where you have the like silhouette and then the like distorted voice.
Right. I don't imagine it's been any different in your recent experience, but certainly they didn't teach me how to speak to the media in library school, like spinning PR, like that's a whole field, right? There's professionals that do that. It's not something that we talk about, that we train for. It's not whoever thought we'd be doing this stuff, right?
Right. My student assistant job is I profile librarians about like alumni and such. So I'm very comfortable interviewing people. But it's normally like fun interviewing, like, oh, how did you find libraries? Like,
Right.
how did you get your job? That kind of thing. So,
Uh-huh.
a lot of people I talked to or have talked to have been somewhat angry, not at me, but just with what's going on. And it's like, wow, this is a very different, obviously tonal experience. And I'm glad that they want to talk, and understandably, there's feelings behind it. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's scary. It's not, none of us thought we'd be doing this when we got into it. I want to share a story because it's one of the positive ones.
No, it's good to remember and to think about as much as possible to not us versus them, because it's so easy to do.
It is. It is.
I guess the other thing I'd say is you said is somewhat positive. Is there anything that you are optimistic about, or you could even say anything you're concerned about as well?
I think I am optimistic because I think this process in learning, especially going through like what the actual law says, what the process is, ultimately the book banners are on the wrong side of the law. Right? What they're doing is illegal. It's against the First Amendment. And, it's not the Second Amendment. It's not the 14th Amendment. It's the very first one. So ultimately, these things will fail. But unfortunately, it's going to take time because, the wheels of justice move slowly or whatever. These things take time. And people are getting hurt in the process, and it's hurting our colleagues and our profession. And that's sad and terrifying. But I think the good news is they're not going to win. Ultimately, libraries on the right side of justice, and ultimately these books will be restored. Libraries will be reopened. It's just going to take time. And these people will move on to whatever their next target is, because it's not really about libraries, right? It's a different thing. So, but that makes me feel optimistic. They're going to lose eventually.
Since for example, you're in charge of a library, like, do you have any advice for anybody that is in a similar position should something like this come up for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of what I touched on before, but it's cultivate allies in the community on both sides of the political line, right? Really It's not about, people are sick of me here saying it around here. Like, it's not Jason Public Library, it's the Rio Rancho Public Library. So what is the community in Rio Rancho? And are we representing everyone in that community? Even the people whose views I don't personally hold. Look at your collection, look at your programs, look at your displays. Are you representing your whole community? And are you cultivating allies from the whole community? Right now, it's easy just to, like you said, to make it us versus them and just to go to one side of the aisle there. But that's not what we're here for. That's not what we do. Being proactive about that was helpful for us here, and I think it's helpful everywhere. And I think it's what we should be doing.
Well, I really appreciate that you've taken the time to talk with me today. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would still like to cover?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I appreciate you being willing to talk to me and us getting to share our story, and hopefully if this helps colleagues or other library students, hopefully it's useful.
No, I really appreciate this, and yeah, it's been good.